Good morning, George. Today's lesson is about improper fractions. Do you know what improper fractions are?
Fractions that have done something wrong?
Very witty, George, but not quite. Is 3/5 a fraction, George?
Yes, of course it is.
Is 9/5 a fraction, George?
I think so, but it's a bit funny because the number on the top is bigger than the number on the bottom.
Exactly, George, and that's why it's called an improper fraction.
I get it. I remember we used to call them vulgar fractions.
Yes, but vulgar is a bit vulgar. So we'll call them improper. Is 2 3/4 a fraction, George?
Well, the last bit of it is.
Yes, and that's why we call it a mixed number, because it's a mixture of a whole number and a fraction.
Do you know, Gus? When you explain it like that, it almost makes sense. Now I remember we always used to call them top-heavy fractions. Do you know why they're called top-heavy, Gus?
Yes, I do know, George, but I'll ask the questions today.
Okay, Gus, no need to be so superior about it.
All right then, George, don't overstep the line. It's time now, anyway, to go to the blackboard and explain it in more detail. So today's lesson is about improper fractions, and in order to demonstrate what improper fractions are, I'm going to use pieces of chocolate, and the numbers along the bottom that we see here are representing bars of chocolate. So I'm going to keep adding to my single square of chocolate, which I've got here on the left, and I will eventually reach the number 1, and when I do, I will have 1 whole bar of chocolate. I'm then going to go on increasing the number of pieces of chocolate until I reach 2 bars of chocolate. So let's start by looking at what fraction the single square of chocolate represents. Because I've divided my whole bar of chocolate into 5 pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then the bottom of the fraction will be 5. That's what we call the denominator of the fraction. And because I've only got 1 single square of chocolate, 1 piece of chocolate, then the fraction will be 1/5, 1 piece out of 5 pieces. Now I'm going to add a second piece of chocolate to my bar to increase the fraction size. So the number on the top of the fraction will now change to 2, as I've now got 2 pieces. So I can keep on adding pieces of chocolate until I've got 1 whole bar of chocolate. And I can change the top number in my fraction to 5, so the fraction is now 5/5. Which means, of course, that 5/5 and 1 whole number are exactly the same thing. Okay, so now let me just draw a line to separate the 2 bars of chocolate. I'm going to add my first 2 pieces to the second bar. So when I write the fraction for the 7 pieces, I will put the 7 on top, and the fraction will be 7/5. But I know from looking at my diagram that that must be equivalent to 1 whole bar and 2 extra pieces, or 1 whole bar and 2/5 of the second bar. Now 7/5 is what we call an improper fraction, sometimes called a top-heavy fraction or even called a vulgar fraction. The top number is bigger than the bottom number, but it can also be written as a mixed number. So when we write it as a mixed number, we're writing it as a whole number plus an extra fraction which goes beside it. So all improper fractions can be written as mixed numbers. Okay, so now let's finish off the 2 bars of chocolate by adding 3 extra pieces to make up the 10 pieces in total. So if there are 10 pieces now, then the fraction can be written as 10/5. And because we have 2 whole bars of chocolate, then 10/5 must be equal to 2 whole numbers. Okay, let's now go through the steps that we need to do in order to change an improper fraction into a mixed number. The first step is to divide the bottom number into the top number. So if we look as an example, as we had on the previous page, we will divide the 5 into the 7, which goes once. The remainder will be 2, and I will now put that remainder over the bottom number to make the fraction that goes with the whole number. So if the remainder is 2, then I will be putting 2 over 5, and so my final answer will be 1 2/5. Okay, then a second example just to reinforce those steps. The fraction this time is 19 over 6. So if we go through the same steps again, I need to divide the bottom number into the top number. So I need to divide 6 into 19. 6 into 19 goes 3 times. There's a remainder of 1, and I'm going to put that 1 over the bottom number. I'm going to put 1 over 6. So the answer is going to be 3 whole numbers and 1 over 6. So it's now time for you, the audience, to try a problem to test your understanding of what we've done so far. So I suggest you press the pause button on your video and try out 23 over 4 and change it into a mixed number. George will also try it, and we can then compare answers, and hopefully you will have got the same answer as George, and we can then move on to the next stage. Okay, George, so would you like to tell us what answer you got for this one, please?
First, I would divide 23 by 4, and that would go into 5 times with 3 left over. So the answer would be 5 3/4.
Well done, George. That's absolutely right. Okay, now let's look at the reverse process of changing a mixed number into an improper fraction. This is an example we've looked at before, but of course it was in reverse, because when we had 7 over 5, we changed it into a mixed number, and we had 1 whole 1 and 2/5 as our fraction. So how would we do it the other way? Well, if we think of 1 whole bar of chocolate as we did initially in this lesson, that 1 whole could be thought of as being 5 over 5. So if 1 whole 1 is 5 over 5, and then we've got an extra 2 over 5, if we add 5 over 5 and 2 over 5, that will give us 7 over 5. But the quickest way of doing it is usually to follow these 2 steps, which is to multiply the whole number by the bottom number of the fraction. If I multiply 1 by 5, that gives me 5. And then I add the top number of the fraction. So I multiply 1 by 5, get 5, add the 2, that gives me 7, and I put that 7 on the top. The 5 is exactly the same on the bottom as it is in the fractional part of the mixed number. Okay, there was quite a lot there to follow, so we're going to go through the same process another couple of times. If you feel you've grasped it and want to go on and try a problem for yourself, you can skip the next bit and go on to the next page. Okay, so the mixed number this time is 2 whole numbers and 2/3. So following the steps again, we're going to multiply the 2 whole number by the 3, and 2 times 3 gives us 6. Then we go to the top and add the 2. 6 and 2 makes 8. So that will give us 8 on the top, and the bottom stays the same as 3, so it will be 8 over 3. Okay, now let's look at the third one. The whole number is 3. We multiply the whole number 3 by the number at the bottom. 3 times 4 will give us 12. Then we go to the top and add the 1 to the 12, and that will give us 13. So 13 over 4, because the 4 doesn't change. So the answer is 13 over 4. Okay, so now it's time for you, the audience, to test your understanding of what we've done in the second part of this video. If you'd like to press the pause button on your video and change 4 2/3 to an improper fraction, and then we'll compare that with George's answer after you finish. Okay, George, would you like to tell us how you did this one?
Yes, I would multiply the 4 by 3, and that would give me 12. I would add the 12 to the 2, and that would give me 14, and the answer would be 14 over 3.
Well done, George. That's absolutely right. And in fact, that is the end of today's lesson on improper fractions. Thank you very much for joining us. And so it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from me.